Scott Griggs will help you gain confidence by sharing his knowledge of making and maintaining bowstrings and how vital it is to your success. Scott has won many local and state archery tournaments and has harvested many animals that qualify for Pope and Young. Currently, he holds 2 state bow hunting records, including a non-typical elk that ranks 7th in the world. Scott currently shoots for Browning and owns and operates Yellowstone archery products. D. Wild shares his knowledge and helpful hints on string maintenance and performance and what D expects out of a bowstring. D's contributions to the sport of archery are deemed extraordinary by his fellow archers. He is also the first archer ever to be ranked #1 for 4 consecutive years by the Professional Archers Association. D currently owns and operates Wild Arrow Pro Shops and also shoots for Martin Archery.
Welcome to Bowstrings Made Easy. We're going to take you on an in-depth look at bowstrings and their importance and their value to the archer today. There's a lot of things about strings, I believe, that are being forgotten. A lot of them is just plain, which is sad. The string is doing everything. You've got a good bow, you've got a well-tuned arrow. What about the string? Your string is transferring your energy. It's basically the backbone of your bow and what it does. Strings need to be well maintained, waxed, taken care of. Servings changed often for safety reasons. Not only that, fitting your arrow or your nock is very important too. That's another benefit of tying your own strings and learning how your arrows fit to your string. You can tie a string to the exact 1/8 inch should you want a comfortable anchor point. You can do that. You can adjust a bow so much, but you can also take your string and adjust it to the 1/8 inch. So there is a lot of benefits to doing your own strings and at least understanding them. I believe every archer out there should at least know how to change their own servings. Should a serving break or start to come undone, he can deal with that. If he's out in the field or on the target line, that can save a lot of frustrations at a critical moment. And we spend lots of money on our equipment and time on hunts. What about a $10 item or a $12 string? It shouldn't be neglected. You get out there in the field, take an extra string with you. If you're tying strings, you can do 2 back to back, one the same length as the other one. And you can shoot one string in, tie in your nock and point and peep. You can take your second string and shoot it in too, tie in your nock and point and peep, and you've got a spare. Excellent way to go. Just save you a little heartache. If you're out in the middle of nowhere, say you're up in Quebec, 2,000 miles from nowhere, and you touch your string with your razor blade, your broadhead, your hunt's over. If something should happen on the target line, and you know how to deal with it, this aspect of it, you're right back in the game. You're going to need a few items to get started tying strings. This here is standard equipment for most archers. It's a bow square, which is real handy for tying in nocking points and peeps, or even doing your measuring or your loops, or servings. You're going to need some fibers, such as B50, Fast Flight, Acroflight, in your Vectran materials, Streamline. There's a lot of fibers out there, and check with your local dealer. They'll help you in selecting fibers. And I would suggest trying a few of the fibers to see what you like best. You're also going to need some nylon serving thread. You're going to need some Spectra, which works real well with your Fast Flight materials or any of your Vectrans. I prefer to use your nylon threads with your B50 when you're doing your loops or your loop closures. There's also some 350 nylon out there, which is real nice, by BCY Fibers. You're going to need some center servings. Some of the old standards are your 21 mono or your 18 monofilament. There's different colors available in those: black, clear, blue, orange. There's even a braided fast flight out now, which is real nice. You can experiment there too if you wish. You're going to need a good bobbin. I would recommend either Pro Server by Cavalier Archery or the Bjorn server. You're going to need a good wax. Textite has been around a long time, or an ML6. If you're working with Vectran fibers, I would suggest an ML6 by BCY Fibers. Also, you're going to need a marking crayon, magic marker, or a Mark-A-Lot pen. You're going to need a tape measure. I highly recommend a pair of pliers too on your tails when you close your loops or pull your tails through. Use a pair of pliers rather than your hands. A razor blade's handy to cut your lute's tails out. You're also going to need a good string jig. This one here that we're going to use is by Yellowstone Archery. It's all solid steel. It's got a measuring gauge already on the front of it. It's got an indicator spot down here, so you can just swing down to your desired length, set your knob, and you're ready to go, rather than trying to reach your longer strings to see where you're really at. We're going to show you how to get started tying a continuous bowstring today. First thing you want to take into consideration is the length of the string. You can look at your bow, and it should be on the bottom limb from the manufacturer. They list it. This particular bow here is a Browning. It lists it at 59.5 inches. So we're going to set our string jig at 59.5 here. And if you twist up your string at all, at this point you want to take in consideration if you put 10 or 12 twists in your string to keep the fibers together when you're shooting, you might want to add a little length. So we're going to take and add about a 1/4 inch. Another thing you want to look at is knock fit. Take your arrow, say on your old string, you got to determine the number of strands of fiber you're going to use. I like my nocks to clip on fairly tight for several reasons. If I'm out shooting and I shoot all my arrows into the target and a fellow archer shoots and injures one of my arrows, or I hit the back of one of my arrows, and I look at it and I don't catch that it has been injured, when I go back to the line or re-knock the arrow at any time, I'll have a second chance, not only by feel when I click that arrow on, but by sound, how that clips on. If it's injured and I didn't catch it when I pulled my arrows, I'll be able to detect that before I shoot. It'll save your equipment. It'll also save a fellow archer from injury or yourself. In drying firing your bow, all kinds of things can happen. Another thing to keep in mind is here, if it calls for, it's like a 59.5 inch string, look at your wheels too, due to rollover. If the string is starting to stretch a little bit and you're starting to get a overlay of your strings, you can take and subtract an 1/8 inch or a little bit if you so wish to take care of that problem. But that's one indication I would check, is look at your wheels from time to time and see how your string life is holding up. We're going to use a blue fast flight material here. Primarily, you can trick a bow out to its color, so I'm going to use a blue to match this pretty blue bow. So to get started, I'm going to leave a little tail. I'm just going to tie it around this knob a couple times. You're going to take your spool in one hand and go around your first spindle here. And now we're going to go down to this end. And each time we go down around these posts, you're going to want to keep the same amount of tension on your fiber. You can just snug it. You don't have to reef on it. Just snug it. And do that about each time as you go around. Just check your tension. And each time as you go, count your strands. We want an 18 strand string, so we're going to go around 18 times. If you go around these a few times and you lose count, all you got to do is count 1/2 side of these. You got 9 strands on each side. That's 18 strand string. These two bundles are going to come together here when we finish. Now we'll come down to this other end. After we've got our desired number of strands. And we're just going to take this and reel off a foot or 15 inches or so. And we'll show you how to do the connecting inner knot. Now that we've cut our string away from our spool, we've got two loose ends here. Keep them on their proper side and just take the two, one that's running this way to your right, just take the two here. As you see, we're going to cross them and we're just going to go the other way with them. At this point, we'll take, and we're going to put this little cross that we've made with the two strands, we're just going to put it right in the middle between these two posts. And then what I do is I just take one side here, and I'll even put a 1/2 hitch in here just to hold it, or a couple of them. Then I'll take this side and I'll do the same thing. But keep in mind you got to go around these arms, these spindles, the same way. This way with the string, because when you open them up, it'll seize it up. If you don't, throw a little 1/2 hitch on there. And there's our knot right in the middle. As you can see, this knot right here will be hidden when we do our inner loop closure underneath it. It'll lock it right in there. There's two basic styles of loops you want to take into consideration. This particular loop here is for like a teardrop bow that has little teardrops on the end of it. So you'll want it a little bigger so it will be able to hook over it. This loop here is a smaller loop and it hooks on the inner part of the wheel system, on a partial system. This particular string that's going on this bow is going to need a small loop. So we'll go down here and show you how that's done. We're going to take a tape measure and we'll show you this little knot right here. We want a small loop, so we're going to use a total distance of 1.5 inches. We're taking a marking pencil and we'll just put a little mark there with your Mark-A-Lot, and we'll come down here 1.5 inches and make another mark. And as you can see, our knot is right there. It's slightly off center. The reason it's slightly off center is when you put this knot and hide it, it's not in the back of the string, it's in the side of the string. Therefore, making it a loop a little stronger. If you're doing a bigger loop, such as this, it goes on a teardrop, we would just merely take our tape and make a bigger mark here. Just increase the span of our marks. And then we're going to serve over that in between those two marks. And then when you take and you divide it in half there for your loop, you'll have a bigger loop. This particular string, in deciding on which fiber to use for your inner loops or your loop closures, this particular string is fast-flight material. I would highly recommend either Brownell's Spectra serving or BCY's number 2 serving thread. If you're using a Dacron fiber, which I do not recommend for the use on wheels that hook on the inner wheel, I highly recommend using Fast Flight or Streamline or some of the other stronger fibers so you don't get as much stretch in the shot. If you're using Dacron B50 on your teardrops, fibers such as Brownell's number 4 nylon serving thread works great, or BCY's number 400 nylon serving thread works well too. And they do come in different colors, so you can pick which color you'd like to use. We're going to select a black Spectra for this particular string. At this point, take your posts where you've made your mark there on the middle, in between these two posts. We're going to open these posts to a 90 degrees, such as this. Now we're ready to tie the inner loop. As you can see, our two marks are right here. We'll take our Spectra fiber and we're going to start right here and we're going to serve this way. So take your fiber like this, take your bobbin in your one hand and your tail in your other, and we're just going to take this bobbin and we're going to wrap over itself, creating a little lock. At this point, you've made your first lock. You can take this strand, hold it down the side there, and continue to wrap over it. Wrap over it 4 or 5 times until you get started. Now you can take this strand here and you can slide these down just a little bit till you're right on your mark. And you can pull this tail, which will tighten that first 5 strands up, and you're free to wrap with your bobbin. Wrap a couple of times and feel your bobbin pressure. If your bobbin pressure is a little tight or too tight, you can undo this a little bit, but this is the time to select your pressure. I like it fairly tight. And we're going to wind down that 1.5 inches. At this point, before you go too far, take your razor or your knife and just cut that little strand out of there. Be careful not to cut your string of the work you've done, or we'll have to start over. Then just continue to wrap. Now that we've reached our little mark there, or just before it, about 1/8 inch, we're going to reel off 10, 12 inches here, and we'll take our razor, hold this tight so it doesn't come loose on you down here, and we're just going to cut it. Now we're ready to show you a whip finish knot. If the tail is coming off the top, you want to take the back of your tail there and go underneath, opposite way. Just remember, if it's coming off the top, go underneath, opposite way, because we're going to unwrap that. And then take your loop, after you've gone underneath, back wrap to the inside of the loop you've just made. We're going to do this about 8 times. And then you've got your tail. Take your tail and go underneath this strand coming off and continue to wrap the same way you were wrapping with your bobbin. I use my thumb each time I pull on this to hold it from getting away. You'll use this knot on servings, loop closures, about every string. You can learn this knot, you can fix a string or make one. Now that you've got your loop, you've unwrapped this end, take your tail and just pull it through. But hold on to that loop so it don't get away from you. And then you can take your tail and just pull it shut. At this point, I like to use a pair of pliers too, because some of these fibers are abrasive and they will cut you rather easily. So take your pliers and just pull on that and snug it up. And once it's nice and tight, it'll appear just as tight as the rest of this. Take your razor blade, I bend this back, and I'll just snip that off, and there's your first inner loop. We'll just take and unwind this part, Now we're going to take this inner loop that we've made. We've cut our tails out. Or you can leave them in. You can snip them right back here if you want. I like to leave mine in. Now we're going to take and we're going to spin this around to the ends so we can measure our other side. Take your inner loop, twist it around here, and offset just the loop just a little bit. And then take your two tails that you had and just put them down your string fibers here so they lay in real nice. And we're ready to close this loop off. We're going to go down to the other end and measure exactly the same so the cosmetics on the other end are the same as this end. So take your tape at this point and measure this little loop. Here you're down about 5/8. On this side we're about 7/8. So these are oscillated. So when we go ahead and close this loop here, you don't get a big bump there coming out of your wheel. If you get a big bump there, it might change your wheel synchronization, having a buildup coming out of the wheel. That's the reason we do a small loop that stays inside the wheel rather than start tracking out of the wheel. So let's go down to the other end and do it the same way down there, 5/8 and 7/8. Now on the opposite side, we're going to make our marks the same as they were on the opposite end down there that we just finished. At 7/8 we'll make a mark, and then we'll come over on this side and make a mark at 5/8. Now we're ready to open our posts and complete the inner serving on our loop at this end. Now take your string fibers with your two little marks there that we've just made and slide them in between the two posts. At this point, the two marks are in the middle. We're ready to open this opposite post here to a 90 so we can complete our inner loop. Now we're ready to wrap between the lines here. So we're going to do the same knot process as we did on the opposite end. Take your string, put it over top, and just take the bobbin and wrap over itself. Come to the inside of yourself, come to the inside there, and lay this strand down the line and continue to go over it about 5 times. Now at this point, we're going to take this strand here and we're going to slide these down to our mark. And we're going to pull on this strand to pull those nice and snug. Now we're ready to continue to use our bobbin and do our inner loop. At this point, take your tail that we've wrapped over with our bobbin and cut it out. Be careful not to cut your fibers on your string. Cut that out and continue to wrap with your bobbin. We haven't changed our bobbin tension since we were at that other end. It will keep it the same tension on everything we do, so everything's exactly the same. If these fibers tend to wrap up or twist, there's no need to worry. Now that we've got to the end of our mark there, just reel off 10 inches or 12, and we're going to do our whip finish knot. If the tail is coming off the top, you want to take the back of your tail there and go underneath, opposite way. Just remember, if it's coming off the top, go underneath, opposite way, because we're going to unwrap that. Then take your loop, after you've gone underneath, back wrap to the inside of the loop you've just made. We're going to do this about 8 times. And then you've got your tail. Take your tail and go underneath this strand coming off and continue to wrap the same way you were wrapping with your bobbin. I use my thumb each time I pull on this to hold it from getting away. You'll use this knot on servings, loop closures, about every string. If you can learn this knot, you can fix a string or make one. Now that you've got your loop, you've unwrapped this end, take your tail and just pull it through. But hold on to that loop so it don't get away from you. And then you can take your tail and just pull it shut. At this point, I like to use a pair of pliers too, because some of these fibers are abrasive and they will cut you rather easily. So take your pliers and just pull on that and snug it up. And once it's nice and tight, it'll appear just as tight as the rest of this. Now that we've got our inner loop on each end, we're going to take our bowstring fibers and we're going to match up our two loops here. We'll get them about where they're cosmetically oscillated the same. Right there. And they're offset a little down here, and they're offset just a little bit down here. At this point, you're ready to take some wax and wax the bowstring fibers here where we're going to close our loops now, because it's the last time it'll see wax. Each time on a string we close something up and it's the last chance it'll see wax, wax it up. Just enhance the life of your fibers. Okay, now that we've waxed our fibers here and we're ready to close our loops, we added a 1/4 inch here to allow for our twist in our strands because it's going to shrink the string. So let's reset our jig from 59 3/4 to 59 1/2. Now we're going to take our fibers off and twist them up. Let's put our twists in our string. It loosened it up a little bit, so we'll just pull it off. We're going to keep it tight, and we're going to twist our string up, which is going to shorten it a little bit. And the reason for doing this, the reason I do it at this point is I believe that these twists run all the way through your loop closures and your serving. If you were to go ahead and put your loop closures on each end and not having it twisted up in your serving, and then you go twist it up, it brings these fibers closer together. And not only that, when you have your serving on there, your loop closures right here, it creates a tight knot. And so when you twist up to that knot, it creates a weak point, which is prone to break. So we're going to twist that up about 15 times. The more twists you put in this at this point, if you're a peep sight shooter and you have a hard time with your peep coming back to you straight every time, if you put a few more twists in it, eventually your peep will come right back to you. And you won't have to fight it by overlapping strands or moving your string to make your nock hold it when you nock your arrow. It'll automatically come right back to you. Now at this point we're just a tad short, so we're going to open this bar just a little bit, slide it on there, and close it. That little radius that we just did will help tighten our string back up. If you wish, you can open your bar to a 90 here. You can even slide it up just a little bit and put some more tension on that. That's about right. It's about the same tension that's on a bow. If you make it even more tension that's on a bow, that's even better. You'll get a nice tight loop closure that'll track well in your wheels. Not only that, when you do your servings, they'll be nice and tight, so that helps them to keep from slipping or sliding. And we'll show you some other tricks there, what we do with our servings to keep them from sliding. So now we're ready to do our loop closures. You can change colors of your string, your serving material here if you wish. To trick out a string, you can have your loops one color and your loop closures another. We're going to stay with the same color. At this point, we want to twist this bobbin the same way we twisted our string. this point, we're going to do the same knot. We're going to wrap over ourselves here a couple of times. Now keep in mind, the smaller the loop here, make it as small as you can so you can keep it inside your wheels. Some bows you don't have to worry about that. The reason I start here rather than back here, wind up and then back over itself and back down, is if I can start here and lock it, it keeps it nice and small, so when it comes out of the wheel and starts tracking, it's all the same. Therefore, I know I'm not going to change my wheel sync by having it built up here coming out of that wheel. There's no chance of it offsetting either wheel. Once you've gone over it 4 or 5 times, take this strand here and you're free to cut it out. Take your razor. Be real careful not to cut your string. And our bobbin tension has been left the same as when we did our inner loops. At this point, these are a real small loop we're doing here. We're going to take some string off the bobbin here and wind it down by hand just a little bit. These posts are nice and small, but it's still, with the bobbin here, it still tends to get in the way once in a while. Once you've got it wrapped down a little bit, you can close your bobbin up to your string and continue to close your loops. If you're shooting a bigger wheel, you're going to have to consider, do you want your loop closure to run down a little further? So you can go 12 or 15 inches. If you're doing a teardrop string with, say, B50 or Dacron, you're going to have a bigger loop here. You don't need to come down that far. Then you can start here, wrap up, and then back down. This particular wheel, we're going to wrap down about 8 inches. That should be sufficient to come out of the wheel, so it all tracks the same. Now if you notice right here, here's our tails where we did our first lock on our string. They're being locked in again, just for additional strength. Once they've been locked in a ways, they can get in the way. And once they've been set, you can take your razor and you can cut them out now if you wish to. Okay, now that we've measured down 8 inches, we'll stop there. And we'll pull some tail off of our bobbin here, and we'll do another wet finish knot. And we're going to repeat this process exactly the same at the opposite end. We'll do 8 inches there too. Now that you've cut your tail off of your bobbin here, give yourself about 10-12 inches to work with. This tail is coming off the bottom of the string. We're going to take and go on the top to form our loop. Now take this strand and wrap to the inside. When you complete a loop closure or a serving, I like to wrap it down at least 10-12 times. The more you can wrap it like that, it creates a nice bite. Then take your tail here, pull it over to here, lay it in there, and then take your loop and continue to wrap the same way that you did with your bobbin. And this, it's taking it off over here and winding it on over here. Once that's wound on there, we can pull it shut. Hold your loop so it don't get away from you. You can really have a mess. Just pull it through. Pull it snug and take your pliers so you don't cut your hands. And pull that nice and snug. At this point we'll take our razor blade and we're going to leave about 1/4 of an inch there and then cut it. Now grab some fire, a match or a lighter. I've left about 1/4 inch of tail there. I take a little lighter and I burn that back. Be careful not to get too close to it. You fire too close to that stuff, you'll ruin your work. So be careful. But that'll leave a little bump there on that, and it'll never pull out or come undone. Now we'll go down to the other end and repeat the same process. Keep in mind which way your string is going. You're going to wrap your string, your bobbin the same way, the way your string is twisted. Now that we've repeated our process down here at this end, it's exactly the same as this end. We're 8 inches for cosmetic reasons right to the side, the same down here. Our loop size is even 5/8 here. Make your loops the same on each end. This one's 5/8 and so is that. Now you're ready for a center serving. Now we're ready to put on our center serving. Our string length is 59.5, as we had wished. We're going to take exactly half of that, which is 29 3/4, which is right here. That's exactly half of our string. And now we're going to measure up 4.5 inches from that dead center right here, and we're going to make a little mark. And now we're going to take and measure down 7 inches, and we'll make another little mark. And this is where we're going to put our serving. I'm going to use a 21 monofilament, and I'm going to put this on, and I'm going to wrap it with the twists, not against it. Reel off about a foot or so for tail, and we're just going to overlap ourselves here. To lock it, we're going to do this 5 or 6 times. And we're going to find our mark, which is right here. We'll just slide this series of strands down to it. Now what I do at this point is I'll take this tail and I'll tighten my series of knots up nice and tight. And now I'll continue to wrap. At this point, test your bobbin tension. This one's a little tight. You want to keep it tight so it stays on there. But don't get it too tight. You'll get halfway down and it'll snap on you. But you want it tight enough where they don't slide up and down. And what I do is I hold this tail in this hand rather snug, and I wrap over it. And therefore it creates a bite between our string fibers and our monofilament, so our serving doesn't slide up and down. On some of your fibers such as Fast Flight, Acroflight, Streamline, some of that, that's a good practice to use, is this tail to stick in there, and you'll never have to worry about a serving coming undone. But I do hold this tail rather tight. That way I don't get bumps in my serving. It's all nice and straight when it goes on. But I'll come down here a little bit, and before I get too far, I'll take my arrow that I'm going to be shooting, and I'll just clip it on here, and I'll test it, see how the fit is. You don't want it too tight. You don't want it too loose to where it'll slide up and down. If you get it too much build up here, it'll swell your throat of your nock, which can fatigue your nock and whatnot. After we've determined we've selected the right serving, we'll just continue on. If our arrow was swelling the nock, we could use an 18 mono and try it. Or we might have to go back and restart the string using maybe 2 less strands to get the nock to fit proper. But whatever arrow you're shooting or what setup, play with your string fiber strands and decide which is best for you. Another thing that's nice to know, if you can do your own servings, and say you're shooting one arrow and you switch to another arrow, your nocks have switched sizes, your throats. You can take off your serving and put another one on with like an 18 mono or even a braided fast flight or any of those to get your nock to fit proper. Should you want to switch arrows, but you wouldn't have to switch strings. Another thing when you're putting servings on is to keep this bobbin always traveling. I don't let my bobbins get away from me on the loop ends or my servings. I always keep it moving. If it should get away from me, it creates for a loose spot in a serving or in a loop closure. That's why I always hold on to it. Another thing that's nice to know is if you can do your own servings, you can make a string. You should check under your servings from time to time if you're shooting a lot where your nock set goes on here. What happens is you create a V every time you shoot. It's kind of like a wire effect. Underneath that serving and in the serving is getting a lot of work, such as a wire. It bends back and forth, and pretty soon it fatigues your string where your nock is fitting on, and your release or whatever, if you're shooting a release, there's a weak spot there. And if you take your servings off time to time, you might check that because it's a real likely place for a string to blow if it's been shot for a long time. Therefore, you won't injure your fellow archer standing next to you or yourself, or injure your equipment. So that's something that you should think about too, is change your servings from time to time. And then you know if your servings are nice and clean and crisp and you go to a tournament or you're going to hunt, you don't have to worry about a serving blowing up or coming undone on you. But I usually carry an extra string or an extra bow if you can afford to when you do go to an extra tournament or on a hunt, so you have a backup. But I highly recommend tying 2 strings at the same time so you do have a backup string. If you're going hunting way out, you've got a backup should something happen, because you just can't fly 2,000 miles to get a $6 string. So keep that in mind. If you're doing 1 string, you just might as well do 2. Now that we've gotten down to the end of our serving, we'll cut this tail out of here. And we're going to reel off, about 10, 15 inches. It's important to hold on to the string real tight so this don't become loose. Same knot as we've done before. This for our string fiber, our monofilaments coming off the bottom, take it the opposite way over top, creating your loop. Then back wrap towards your inner loop. We're going to wrap this about 12 times to create a good hold on it. After we've done that, we're going to take this little tail here, and we're going to take it, and we're going to put it right over here and tuck it in there, and we're going to continue to wrap the same way the bobbin was. And each time we do this, I'll pull on this little tail and use my thumb here to hold that little series of wraps so they don't become loose. As you can see, it's coming off of this end, and we're winding it on over here. If you can do that knot, you can always repair a string, or if you see it coming undone, it's a nice knot to know. And once you're down, you have a loop. Just hold on to it, take your tail, and pull your loop shut. Now we can take our pliers. We don't want to tug too hard on this or we'll snap it. Just pull it snug where it's nice and tight. Now you're free to cut it, but leave about a 1/4 inch. And we'll burn this back. Be careful with your fire, because if you get it too close, boy, this fast flight just goes right up in smoke. But cut that back and leave a little knob there, and it will never pull out. And there you have a complete continuous bowstring. We're going to show you how to tie in a knocking point using some serving material here. This here is a number 400 nylon serving thread by BCY, or you can use a nylon number 4 serving thread by Brownells, which is real nice, or a Spectra serving. Anything you would prefer or like, they all work well for tying in a knocking point and peep. Okay, now when we tie in our knocking point, take your bow square and set it in there where you want it. This particular bow square is a super tool by Jim Dandy Archery. It's got a whole lot of functions on it. But take your serving thread and we're just going to stick it in here. And we're going to take our 2 strands like this, and we're going to take our right strand and stick it over top. Kind of like the first half of a square knot there. And then tighten it down. We're going to tighten it right at 3/8 inch above 0 there. And we're going to tighten it up. And we're going to do a series of knots that we can just slide up and down the string when we tune our bow. Now we'll take our bow square out. Now, keep in mind, this first part of this loop went on the front. Now we're going to take these around the back. String that's in our right hand over top. Take your string that's in your right hand. We're going to go around the front side of the string now and put it over top. And then tighten it down. Always take the string that's in your right hand and put it over top. We put one series of knot in the front, one in the back. String that's in your right hand, always over top. If you do it the same way, it turns out to be a real pretty series of knots. So I always go right over top. We're going to put this on here about 8 or 9 times. And that'll give us a sufficient amount enough to turn, and it'll hold real well. Now to finish this series of knots, we're going to put a square knot right in front here on top. We're going to take the right string and put it over top and close it. Then we're going to take the string that's in our left hand and put it over top of our right string. Pull this one down through and we'll have a square knot. We'll just pull that up here, tighten it up. And we'll take some fire here. We're going to cut these out. I'll do the same with this one. I'll just burn those back just a little bit. Just be careful with your fire so you don't ruin all your work. And now, when we tune our bow, we can just take these little series of knots and twist it up and down our serving to which way we need to go to tune our bow properly. And when we put in our peep, we can do the same thing. We'll do the same knots. Take your bow square, and we're going to stick it on there, and we're going to find out where our peep goes. You should make a note of where your peep is set in case it moves or something happens. At least know where it goes. My peep is right at 6 inches. So I'll set that there with my bow square. And I'll grab the same color. And we're going to do the same thing as we did to do our knocking point. right string over top. I bring it down here a little bit so I don't got to fight the V in the string when I do this. Right string in your right hand, over top. We're going to put this series of knot in back. Now that we've got our knocking point and our peep ties in, we're going to measure and make sure we're on the right distance here. And then you can just bring these up and they'll slide right up and hold your peep in place from shooting out. Now that we've got our peep in place, we're going to check our rollover. Make sure it comes around to us just right. And it comes straight back. If our peep hadn't come back just right, we'll separate our two tie-in spots, and all we have to do is take a strand from one side, pull it out, and pull it to the other side, depending on which way you need to move your peep. When we made this string, we kept in mind that we were going to put a few twists in it. We put enough twist in it so the peep comes straight back to you. So we got no problem there. We're ready to go. We're going to show you how to do a multicolored string. This string here is going to have a candy cane effect. Select your fiber size. If you're using fast flight or whatever it may be to fit your knock. Dacron B50 is a little thicker than fast flight or some of the other materials, so take that into consideration when you're determining your size on a string. What we did now is we took our two colors and wound them on there the same way we did in part one. Same thing, only use two colors, and we're going to make our lock in the same place, locking both knots. We've done the same thing as we did on our first string. We're going to make the string the same way. Just wrap them around the post here, and you've got your two knots right here. You can offset your two knots just a little bit so you don't create a big bump. Now we've made our marks, which are 1.5 inches, and we left our two overlaps of knots here. Now we're going to open our post to a 90 degree. And now we're ready to take our serving thread here and do our inner loop. Now that we've gone down to our other mark here, reel some thread off your bobbin, about 12 inches or so. And we're going to do that whip finish knot all over again. It's coming off the top, go underneath. Then back wrap inside your loop. 5 to 8 times is sufficient. Take your string here and go under your loop. Then take your loop and continue to wrap the same way you did with your bobbin. And then pull it shut. And we'll do the same marks at the other end. If your fibers get twisted while you're twisting your bobbin around here, and they twist up like this, don't worry about it, because your two posts between them will stop that from spreading on down the string. Now we've come to this point, we've tied our inner loops on both ends. We're going to take our blue colors and put them on one side and our pink colors on the other side to separate them. What I do is I take a blue colored string here and I'll hook it around the blue colors. If you put it around the pink, it'll leave some bleed or a little blue mark on there where they've used kind of a dye in their waxes. And I'll take this string here and I'm going to whip it down here. We're going to do our loop closures. I'm going to put one on the blue there, and I'm going to take and put one on the blue down here. Now we're starting our loop closure. These colors will tend to twist up a little bit. So I'm going to grab a hold of my tail here, and I'm going to pull my blue color out, and I'm going to continue to tie. This will keep the fibers separated as I wrap my bobbin. It bleeds these right down together, right where our loop closure is, and it'll hide them under our loops when we do our loop closure here. Now that we've come down to our other end, use your blue fibers again to pull up on these to keep them from, so they tie in under your loop closure. When you're down to your desired length, say 8 inches or 12 or whatever, depending on your wheel size, you can just let go of that. We'll do our whip finish knot again. Now that we've completed our end wraps, our loop closures, take your little fiber you had in here and just pull it out. Now we're free to take this off and twist it out. Now take your string, your one loop off your far post there, and we're going to put our twists in the string here, giving it a candy cane effect. We're going to put 12, 15 wraps in it, and we'll hook it back up on this post and shut our jig. Okay, now that we've finished, we'll just put some wax on there real lightly, and we're ready to do our center serving. When you wax multicolored strings, be careful not to rub it in real hard. Sometimes different colors or fibers bleed. Check with your different fiber companies and see which ones won't. I recommend a clear monofilament serving for these type of strings. It adds to the beauty of them because the colors show through the monofilament after you've got your center serving on there, and they end up looking real nice. We're going to introduce you to a few of the systems used on different bows today. This Browning has what they call a partial system on it. Just your regular string that hooks inside your wheels, or even used in a teardrop design as a partial system with your standard steel cables. This particular bow here is by Stacy Archery Sales. It's a Targhee, and it has a total system on it, which we call 2 bus cables and a string, made out of some of our bowstring fibers today. We're going to show you how to tie bus cables and a string for your total system bow, if this is what you shoot, this particular design. This particular design also has a yoke system on it. And there's 3 loops on this particular string. There's one that hooks inside the wheel, and 2 that form the yoke up here. So you've got 2 loops to tie on one end and one on the opposite end. We're going to have 2 bus cables to tie and a string, and we'll take you through the steps on how to divide these accurately so they're both the same. On total systems today, wheel synchronization should be considered. To get good arrow flight, I would take a look at when you restring your bow with new strings or new cables. Look at your wheel synchronization. Check it from time to time if you have a hard time tuning your bow. Check this. The point where this one string comes in the wheel and hooks, you can take that out and put a few twists in it, which will regulate this wheel just a little bit. One twist will regulate a little bit of turn. That's very minute. So keep in mind to twist these cables up just a little bit if something should go wrong, and check on them. Some of these fibers they have out nowadays are worth checking into. Check with your local dealer or your local fiber companies. They've gone to a lot of effort to help create us fibers in this department for total systems that will not stretch or creep. And do shoot some of the different fibers out there and see which works best for you on a total system bow. Another thing, if you're shooting a total system such as this one, and cables tend to wear in here, or things show signs of wear, it's time to change it. The cost is minimal, and it'll save you a lot of headache down the line. For this particular bow, we're going to shoot a 20-strand cable. So we're going to put 10 strands above and 10 strands below. We're not going to make this two different strings and hook them together. Now that we've got 10 strands on the bottom, we're just going to take and put 10 strands on the top now. Okay, this particular bow calls for a 40 3/4 inch bus cable. We're going to make 2 of them. So we've got our strands all wrapped. Now you need to close it off the same way we did in the first part of the show. Now we've tied our loops off here. We've made our lock here, like we showed you in part 1, doing the partial system. We're going to open these bars to a 90, and these will just continue to glide around. And as you can still see, they're still divided for a 2-loop yoke. Now we're ready to make our inner loop on our single end and tie our knot there, which we call our inner serving. Now that we've made our 1.5 inch inner loop closure, we're going to take and just spin it down around these ends. And we're going to keep it oscillated there just a little bit. Now we're going to measure down here at this end, and we're going to mark both places at the same time. So when we close our inner loops, they'll be the same. We'll just make a little mark. This loop on this side we made about 7/8 of an inch. On this side we made 5/8 of an inch for this particular bow. If your bow has a bigger or a smaller loop, you can take that into consideration when you form your loop. At this point you can drop this side of 10 strands, and to save yourself a little time, some of the fellers out there have been just closing the loop at this point and serving on down rather than serving the inner loops. That's just an option. Personally, I like to serve the inner loop on both of them, so we'll show you how to do that. But it's not mandatory. We'll just leave that up to you. Now, take your first 2 marks, you can twist it to the inside of the jig here and just open to a 90 degrees. After we've come down on completed our inner loop, you can take and twist it back to where it was supposed to go. And now we can bring up our second side. Set your completed inner loop that's completed down. Spin your second loop over and open your posts, and we'll do it. Now you can see we've done both loops, and both of these match identical. Now we're ready to close one loop and then the other one. At this point, when we do our loop closure, we're going to show you a little different knot here to connect these. We're going to start down below a little bit, and we're going to form our lock just like we did before by going over ourselves. And we're going to travel up to where we want to stop, and then we're going to travel back over ourselves, back down to serving. Now that we've closed one loop down and tied it off, we're going to drop it. We've put our other one on here. Now we're going to serve down and close it. Now we've completed our 2 loop closures. Notice we've made one a little longer than the other one. So the reason we did this is when we split our Y, is there won't be a big bump there. It'll be gradual. But for the meantime, we're going to go down to the other end on the single end and close it off. The reason I like to do these two first is it sets my distance so both harnesses are exactly the same length. Keep in mind, this is the end that's going to hook inside our wheel. At the other end down there, what we did is we started down here a little bit with our bobbin. We came back up here to close our loop, and then we came back down over ourselves and down until we finished. Being this is going to go inside the loop, we're just going to start it right here. We don't want any buildup in there, and we're just going to close it right here. Okay, now we've gone down to this end. We're going to wrap up, and then we're going to wrap back down over ourselves to make it real strong. We do the same bobbin pattern by wrapping up and back on a teardrop string as well. Or a crossbow string, you can do the same thing. Crossbow strings, we usually use 26 to 30 strands of fiber. Fast Flight or B50, whatever the manufacturer suggests for your particular bow. A lot of crossbow strings start at anywhere from 14 inches all the way up. This particular string jig will allow you to do that by using just 3 posts. So when you're doing a crossbow string or a teardrop string, you're going to wind up a ways on your loop closures, such as we have on this one. And we're going to reel off just a little bit, and we're going to start back over ourselves until we can get it started again going the other direction. At this point, you can loosen your bobbin just a fraction so it don't dig in on the part we've already made. And now we're winding back down over ourselves to create a nice sincere lock. Okay, now that we've completed our closure here where we've divided our loops, we'll just take it off the jig. And as you can see, both those loops are exactly the same. That's the reason we like to lock these two ends first before we close this. It doesn't take long until you have a real professional string that you can be proud of and have total confidence in. Now you're ready to do your second bus cable and your string. This is another total system out on the market, and it has a big loop here and a small loop that hooks in the wheel. Keep in mind the different bows you tie strings for. You can measure these loops to your desired loop size. Another thing we do on total systems is, that's kind of neat, is we use a flat mono where our cables cross each other. Not only that, we bring it down far enough here where they cross our cable guard, so when it slides up and down on our cable guard, it don't tear our fibers up. The same way up here, a lot of these fibers we use on these total systems tend to be more abrasive, and when you get two cables going up and riding across each other and you've got a bare fiber there, they tend to work on each other. So one trick we use is a special monofilament line called 1440 by DuPont. We've measured down here 14 inches, which is going to be shy of our cable guard. And we've wound some of this flat 14 mono onto a Pro Server by Cavalier Archery. Works real well. You might be wondering, how the heck do you get a flat mono on a string and go on right? Well, you do it the same way as you do your round mono. Just hook it over yourself like we do to get started. Wrap over yourself 5 or 6 times here. Take your tail, pull it tight, and start serving. You can adjust your bobbin tension at this point. You don't have to put this on super tight. Okay, now that we've gone down to our other mark, let's take off a little bit of this. Notice we've kept our tail in too to create a good bite. We can take our tail and cut it out at this point. Now take your excess there that we've reeled off, and we're going to do the whip finish knot. Same way. If you're coming off over top, go underneath, wrap inside your loop, and back towards yourself. You can put this wrap on, about 12 times like we do our servings. Take a hold of this and then lock it, and just continue to wrap the same way. This then wraps it on one end, and we're wrapping it on the same way we used our bobbin, in the same direction. Pull that shut. Now we can
Hi, my name is Dee Wild. I'm here to talk to you today about something that is probably more overlooked in archery than any other aspect of it. Gentlemen pay several $100s for their bows, and they concern themselves about something as minute as their string that they don't pay attention to or even follow how it works. A couple of things I want to suggest to you is how important this item is. You can spend $1,000 for a bow, and if your strings aren't right, it's not going to shoot. A bow, just an inexpensive bow off of the wall, whether it be a compound, a recurve, or a long bow, or even to the most expensive, if your string height or string length and your makeup is not proper, where your knock sets and stuff is set up, it will not perform up to your expectations. The new strings on the market today, there's so many manufacturers building so much new product, whether it be a Fast Flight, a B50, a Streamline. There's several different products out there. The manufacturers, if they do not have a way to get these at a right tension when they're served, the servings are going to move on you, which is nothing but a headache down the track or down the road from what's going on. The most misunderstood part or overlooked part is your center serving. For example, in accuracy, which I make my living at trying to obtain the best I can out of a bow. If your nock does not fit properly onto the center serving, nice and firm, it's not going to be consistent. If, for example, if it fits on there loose and moves around like this, it can group different because not all the throats on the nock are the same. Not all the throats on arrows after you've shot them for a while will remain the same. But if, for example, you have a string that has a larger center serving, you get it up to the right size so it's a good firm fit on there, you will always notice if it snaps on good and firm, it's going to group good. But if for some reason that arrow doesn't snap on tight, you know that there's a problem with the nock, not to shoot that arrow and not to disintegrate your problem. If you was to dry fire your bow, you could lose your limbs, your wheels, your cables, everything you've got on it. If you're utilizing a total string system, this is so very, very important to you. if you're using a compound bow, for example, the rollover on your wheels is so critical, especially if you're using a cam. If they're not timed exactly perfect on a cam, you actually have 2 lobes to break over instead of 1. If you were manufacturing your own internal string system, so you knew each strand was the same, so you knew every makeup on it was exactly the same, and you did it to the best of your ability, you know everything's going to be timed. Plus, you're going to understand how all of this works to make it work to the best of your advantage. If, for example, you're using a traditional type, a long bow, and you're using a Flemish twist string. On a Flemish twist string or any others, you have the confidence, if you're building them, to take them off, put the right number of twists on it to obtain the proper brace height so your bow will perform at its very best for you, whether it be to increase the brace height, maybe, which will add a little more vibration to it, a little more noise, or if you want to decrease a little bit to help reduce the amount of noise in your bow. All those things are pertained around what this string does. If you're using a B50 material or a fast flight material that is stretching on you or moving on you, you understand how that works. You're not afraid to take it off to put the twists in it. When they first came out with the total string systems, they put the strings on actually with 0 twists. And when you came to full draw up at the upper end and the lower ends, the strings actually would flare out. Now, the average person is not going to see an accuracy change in that, but it sure give a guy some mental problems looking at his string sagging around the outside edges. Now they recommend that you put a minimum of 8 to 10 twists on your string, which helps even up all of your strands on your string. No matter which manufacturer makes it, I have not seen, I sell a lot of strings through there. I have not seen a string from a factory in a mass-produced string that the serving does not move after an initial period of shots, because they cannot be stretched tight enough as the same number of pounds or tension as your bow puts on it, as well as with the use of the new mechanical releases, whether it be the jaw type or a caliper type release. Those things have a lot of effect on these center servings. Through Scott's video, you can learn how to do the servings, how to take care of that, how to eliminate those problems. If, for example, your serving is moving on you, one of the good suggestions you can use, or something you can carry with you for emergency fixtures, is how to repair it in a quick fix with something like dental floss. Dental floss is probably one of the easiest things there is you can carry with you in your quiver or in a backpack, whatever, and it's already a pre-waxed nylon product to give yourself an emergency fix. I was in a tournament in Redding, California a few years back. Terry Ragsdale and I were shooting together, and at that time I did not have dental floss in my quiver. And Terry taught me a good lesson. I was shooting at a target, and my entire serving had moved a great amount. I actually took a 0 on a 10-yard target. And as soon as I shot and realized where it was at, I knew there was something wrong. When we relocated where my nock had moved from, I borrowed some dental floss from Terry Ragsdale. We repositioned my nock set, and that allowed me to continue on without being eliminated. Now, I didn't win, but I was still able to stay within the money. And when you're playing for money, that's really tough to keep everything the same. With dental floss, you can replace your PEEP, you can replace just about anything you need to for an emergency fix. Those repairs like that are all taught to you through Scott's video. They will help teach you how to repair a string, maintain a string. Probably 60% of the customers that come into my shop, especially the bow hunting public, which is the guys go out, they use their bow, and they don't have any idea on how to maintain their strings. A lot of guys will come in after got strings that are 2 and 3 years old. Some of them hold up, some of them haven't. Some of them have been shot so many times that they're ready to blow up right here. If a string breaks, you can break a lot of other things. If you're out hunting or you're out there and something goes wrong, unless you understand how to repair it or replace your string, you've got to come a long ways back into town to get everything fixed for you. And with Scott's video, you can help learn how to do that. He will teach you how to do your end loop servings, whether you're doing a total system that ties off in the wheel, or if you're doing a teardrop type, to set it up so you don't get the expansion and spread and the stretching that appears. He will show you how to replace your center servings so they don't move or so they don't advance on you as much. There's some different materials out there nowadays that are just fantastic as far as durability and strength. Scott goes into a lot of those different materials. He gets to experiment and play with them. And through his knowledge, he can teach you, even if you decide not to build your own strings. This video is worthwhile to do nothing more than to give you a better understanding of how your strings are made, how you can repair them in emergency cases, and how to maintain them on your particular bow. If there's ever any feature that on a bow that is more critical, I don't know what it is, because if the string isn't right, nothing will work. And through Scott's videos, he can teach you how to do that. And thank you.
Another thing you can do for yourself, if you learn how to tie strings, is you can tie yourself a put-in-your-pocket bow press. It's nothing more than about 26 strands of fast slide or streamline or some of your other tougher fibers like that to work on your bow should you be in the field or at a tournament or something and something goes wrong. I do pack an extra string with me or an extra bow already shot in, say like for tournaments. But this little outfit here will save a lot of time and energy should you be out in the middle of nowhere. What it is, it's two little plastic pieces, one on each end, about 2 inches long. And what we've tied is a small loop to go around them, and we've taken some rubber surgical tubing here and just slid over them to hold that in place. Not only that, it protects our bow when it's wedged in our limb forks. What I do is I take a measuring tape and I'll measure from this limb fork here down to the bottom of this limb fork, which is about 38 inches, and I'll subtract 2 inches off of that, and that'll give me my distance to tie one of these. So when I pull my bow back, I can use my knees or sit down, I can pull it back, and I can wedge that little put-in-your-pocket bow press in your limb forks, and then I can change my string or work on it or whatever. There's a few companies out there that have little presses that you can take and put in your pack too that have already been made if you don't want to go that route, that are real handy. If you should cut your string out in the field with a broadhead and your bow's completely in two, then you're going to have to know where your limb bolts are. If you have marked your limb bolts in relation to where they are all the way down and how many they're backed off, you could also undo those and return your bow back to the exact point of beginning, providing you mark them. If I've marked my limb bolt with some kind of marker, I know where my limb bolts were, and I'll write that down and stick it in the glove compartment or something, or even write it on your bow somewhere on a piece of tape or something. But know your turns on your top and your bottom limb, where they were. Another thing is if I've marked my limb bolts, I'll know if my limb bolts are either working out or staying put. So that's something to be in tune in. Now that you can tune your bow by tuning a quarter of a turn each time on your top or bottom limb to tune your bow as you go. Another thing that's a must, that's real important, if you go hunting or leaving for 2 weeks on a trip or something, you're going to take your bow, I always take a little bow packet, like in a set of Allen wrenches, some bowstring wax, a bobbin even, if a serving should blow, and even maybe a bow square. But it doesn't take a whole lot to make up a nice little kit that can help you out somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. So you might want to make yourself up a kit to take with you. There's a couple of different waxes out there on the market. This is Textite synthetic bows wax. It's real popular. Works well for most fibers. B50, Dacron, any of your fast flight materials. There's another wax out there called ML6 by BCY Fiber Company. That's real nice. I like to use it on Vectran materials or a streamlined material. It does require, those materials require a different wax. Our bowstring companies are consistently developing different fibers, and they're finding out that using different waxes, they can keep our strings from stretching or creeping on us. Another thing to use bow wax on is your release. If you're shooting a release with a rope on it, such as this one, you can put a little bit of wax on there, and it'll keep your rope from fraying or coming undue to excessive wear. Another neat thing that happens is if you're out hunting and you keep your rope well waxed, it'll develop a kink in it. So if you're in a hurry and you got to load up on an elk or something or out hunting, you can get your rope right around the gate and back in the gate real quick. One thing about doing your own strings is you'll get out somewhere and people will see your work and they'll give you a call and say, "Will you make me a string?" You can make a little side money doing it. I charge about $12 to $15 on a string, and I have $45 for a total system. That's a string and 2 bus cables. And I use the flat mono method where my cables cross. As Dee and I have talked to you about, learn how to do it and you'll benefit from it. From all the things from knock fit to adding or subtracting an eighth or a quarter inch on your strings to fit your draw length just right. There's a lot of pluses to knowing how to deal with your own strings. It's kind of like building your own arrows or working on your bow. You know what's right, and it's going to give you the confidence you need when you make that hard-earned shot on a critter or you at a tournament and the chips are down. Keep that in mind. Anything you can do to improve yourself and your knowledge of your bow and your equipment is nothing but confidence and performance on your end, in your mind, and in the final result. Anything we can do to help ourselves and our fellow archers that way, we're all for it. We've hoped you've gained something from this show, and practice making strings. If you get in a jam or you've got questions, go down to your local dealer. He should know how to help you out. If not, you can call any one of these companies here listed, and I'm sure they'll be glad to help you out. Thank you and good shooting.